Welcome to this episode of Sunny Silver Linings. Sunny's guest today is Ryan Giles, CEO and head coach of Giles LLC, Team Leadership Coaching. As a business coach, he's helped dozens of MSPs grow their leaders and their profits. Ryan talks about how, why, and what to delegate in your business to achieve the best possible results for your company. And now, your host, the founder and CEO of IT by Design, Mr. Sunny Kayla. Over to you, Sunny.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Sunny. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm super excited about our topic today because I see a lot of leaders struggling with delegation. And I personally struggled a lot and still a student of learning how to delegate better. And so this is really important, something that we're going to talk about. But let's start with learning a little bit more about Ryan. And can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Again, thanks for the invitation to be here today, Sunny. And I'm excited about the topic of delegation too. I think it's one of the items holding back a lot in business today. But a little bit about my background. So I started and ran an MSP for 15 years. And in that time, I think I made just about every mistake you could make, including delegation mistakes. But I guess around my 10th year anniversary in the MSP, I was looking back and looking around and realizing that we had made a lot of progress. Man, there were so many things on my wish list that had never been accomplished. And that's when I came to the realization that that's my problem. I was wishing I wasn't planning, I wasn't executing, I wasn't making the right hires, I wasn't measuring our progress along the way, and I needed a system to run the business. Like a lot of owners of MSPs, I had a technical background, so I loved the IT side of it, but I was a little weak on the management and leadership, so I really kind of doubled down and realized that was my big weakness. And so I started looking, I found a system to run our business, originally using EOS and eventually Pinnacle. I became, a few years later, I became a member of a bigger peer group. And in that peer group, there were a lot of people having issues that I had. And so as they would bring up those problems, I would share, hey, you need this system to run your business. And I was able to share some of these things with them and pretty quickly realized I enjoyed doing that much more than the day-to-day of running an IT company. So I sold my MSP and now I get to help other leaders kind of get what they want out of their business. So it's a lot of fun, and delegation comes up all the time in our conversations. And there didn't seem to be a single book, a single location for like a how-to on how to delegate. I found bits and pieces from different leaders and different books throughout the past decade. But I thought, we need a place to go to really figure out the step-by-step of how to delegate, how to move up to do bigger and better things.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I know you're writing this ebook on delegation. And so I want to ask you, what made you write this book on delegation?
Yeah, really, it came back to how many times I saw this problem. It seemed like 75% of the times when I would meet with new leaders, and I mean MSPs that were 3 employees, MSPs that were 500 employees, seemed to have this issue around delegation. In most cases, they wanted to delegate, but they didn't know how. What I found is sometimes, every now and then, you run into somebody who doesn't really want to delegate. They kind of wear their badge of busyness as a badge of honor. They like to brag on how busy they are, and they really don't want to get better. But the good news is 95% of the time, leaders really do want to do more. They really want to delegate because not only does it benefit the leader, they have more time to spend with their family, more time to focus on the business, to think bigger, think strategically. But it also is a benefit for their employees because you're giving your employees a chance to step up and take on some additional tasks. So, yeah, I think just the simple fact that I was seeing it so often, and I had some really smart clients that did everything else well, but they seemed to struggle with delegating. So that was really my motivation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that the problem is real, especially when it comes to the MSP channel that we both have been part of. You ran your MSP, I ran my MSP. I'm still running my master MSP, and you are the coach for a lot of MSPs. We have experienced it personally. And for example, in my world, I have that technology background. And when I started my startup, MSP startup in New York City, with that technology background, and you got to do everything, right, to survive. It's a survival phase as a startup. You have limited resources, and what you do is what needs to be done. You do, whatever it takes to survive the first 2 to 5 years, because 70% small businesses fail within the first 2 to 5 years. So in order to make it, we have to do everything. But then slowly, as you said, you got to learn what to keep and what to kind of really delegate, what you want to do on a day-to-day basis. And it's a continuous evolution, right? That transformation, because what do you want to delegate today versus what do you want to delegate tomorrow, as the company is growing, as your leadership is growing, and it's keep changing. And a lot of our MSP friends with that technology background, and majority of them are technology background, the majority of them start with those limited resources as startups. So what they do is the right thing to do. But then, as you said, slowly you want to see what do you want to delegate and where do you want to kind of really elevate. And now let's get into what are the struggles? What are the common pitfalls? Tell us about a little bit more about the common obstacles that leaders face when they are intentional about delegating, but they are failing to delegate and elevate.
The one complaint that I hear the most often, and it is the most hilarious, but it's, I don't have time to delegate. I hear that all the time. People say, Ryan, I don't have time to delegate. And I always laugh when I hear that, because your delegation should be giving you back time. So if you don't have time to delegate, we need to start right there. And I think that's really where I think the place to start is deciding that you want to delegate. I think most of us can agree, yes, the answer to that question is yes. The second question is how do you choose what to delegate? You have a lot of tasks. And I think the first step of that, which people don't like to hear, but the first step of that is just simply writing down what you do. How do you spend your day? Just the simple fact of tracking your time for a little while, it will open your eyes. The first time I did that, I'd been a tech and I'd finally moved into more of my true role as the owner of the company. And I really wasn't tracking my time in ConnectWise anymore. And so I didn't really know how I spent my day. Once I really started tracking it, I realized I was spending 4 hours a day in Outlook. I'd become a professional email checker. And I'm like, that's not what I signed up for. Nobody in second grade wishes, when they grow up to be a professional email checker. That's what I'd become. So just the simple fact that I wrote these things down, it opened my eyes and motivated me to make some changes. So the first step is, let's write down where we're spending our time. Are you cutting invoices? Are you reviewing invoices? Are you quoting parts? Are you, speccing out servers? Are you installing, whatever? And so first step, write those things down. And then I think you need to ask yourself 3 questions about each of those items. And I call it the ERA delegation tool. So the first one is enjoyment. How much do you enjoy it? So let's say you're an owner and you used to be a tech like me, and you really enjoy installing new servers. So your enjoyment on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be a 10. I really like that, Ryan. The second one, revenue. How much revenue does this task bring into you? And this is where I think a lot of MSP owners, if they were honest with themselves, they would realize it's not bringing in as much revenue as it could. In other words, they could hire someone to do it for less than it's costing them. So this is where I think you need to really get serious. There was a time in my MSP career, I was quoting parts. I was the shipping and receiving, the procurement person. And I realized I can hire somebody $15, $20, $25 an hour to do this. Why am I doing this? So first question for each of these is how much do you enjoy it? The second one is how much revenue does it bring in? And then the last is aptitude. How good are you at it? You have to be honest with yourself. Hey, am I really good at this? Or can I find someone better? So often we're doing so many things that we're not really great at any of them. We're doing all of them about halfway. So what I found is when delegating, I can hire someone to do some of these tasks. And if they're about 80% as good as I am when they start, in 2 or 3 months, they'll be better than I am because they're not trying to do 50 things. They can focus their efforts. They're coming at it with a new set of eyes. So sometimes they'll have some novel solutions to these problems because they're looking at it in a different way. So I think those are the kind of the first 3 questions. You ask on each of these items, do you enjoy it? Is it bringing revenue? What's your aptitude? And so you score each of those 1 to 10. So it could have the lowest score could be 0, the highest score could be 30. And you simply go through your list and start with the lowest scores. If you've got some 5s or 8s or 7s or 10s, start with those and start delegating there. So back to the pitfalls, what's the biggest question I hear is I don't have enough time. Normally, when someone says that, I ask them 2 questions. I say, listen, if this is a task that is quick and you only need to do it once, you're right. It probably doesn't need to be delegated. If it's a quick task and only needs to be done once, but if it's got to be repeated or if it's very complex and it's going to require a long time period, that's a great time to bring in some resources, bring in some outside help. So a lot of times when people say I don't have time, they're not looking long term. They're looking at the right now. When you're talking about success, I read a lot of books on what makes people successful. And back in the 70s, Harvard did a study and they said, we want to find out what makes people successful. And they tried lots of tests and aptitude tests and IQ tests. And the one surprising thing that turned out to be the most common among successful people was that they had a long time perspective. They made decisions today based on something that was going to happen way down the road. They weren't living for the moment. They were living for the future. The test that they did is called the Marshmallow Test. Harvard took these toddlers, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. They put them in a room with a camera and gave them a marshmallow. And they said, you can eat your marshmallow right now, but if you can wait 5 minutes and not eat your marshmallow, we'll come back and give you a second marshmallow. And so they turned the video camera on and they left the room. And what they found is that the children who could wait 5 minutes and get a second marshmallow, they followed all the children for decades. And the ones that could wait were the ones that were more successful in life. So I think when it comes to delegation, we need to kind of keep that same idea. If we can think about not just our decisions today, but how the decisions today impact a month, a quarter, a year from now, that's when we'll be more successful. So when you're thinking about, I don't have time to delegate, most of the time when people say that, they just really haven't learned how, and it's taking them too much time. Oftentimes too, and we have kind of a mentor in common that answers this next question. They'll say, it takes me too long to write the process. By the time I write the process, I could have just done the job. And Dan Sullivan, I love his concept of who, not how. I used to be the same way. I'd want to delegate something and I'd want to write a 5-page process on how to do it. Dan says, guys, focus on who. If you find the right who, they'll know the how. And so I think that's another important topic. If we hire the right who, so I think we need to get really clear on what we want, the end result, but don't worry about the how so much, because if you can find the right person, they'll figure the how out. In fact, I remember in my sales career when I was our lead salesperson, I thought I was pretty good. And then I hired a great salesperson. I was trying to tell her how to do it, and she would just kind of smile and then still go do it her own way. And her way always proved to be better than mine. So I found that someone who really is the right who, they'll know the how.
Yes, that's so true.
Those are probably the 2 biggest problems I see.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, Ryan, is that time, right? So when it comes to common obstacles, people experience where they're not able to delegate or they're failing in delegate. So number one thing that you hear is time. And so you're saying that is just probably the way you're thinking. It's really not an issue. You got to save some time in your calendar to think about activities that are repeatable, things that are ongoing in nature. It's not like one time, and then take that time to really put that document together and be able to delegate effectively. So time should not be an obstacle. And the other thing I'm hearing you say is that what to delegate is things that you don't enjoy, things that are kind of, you're doing it because you're good at it, because you have been doing this, but it doesn't give you that fuel. It doesn't give you your kind of, your kind of God-gifted skill or God-gifted energy that you have, it doesn't give you your enjoy list. And the revenue and aptitude is another thing that I heard. So when it comes to major issue being time, you're saying that time should not be an issue, and you should be taking time to save a lot more time, because investing that little bit of time will free up a lot more time for you. And then making sure that you know what needs to be delegated and being intentional about your list or day-to-day activities that you do and things that you don't enjoy. Find someone who can do that for you.
Yes, and I'll tell you another mistake that I made myself when I made my list of all the tasks that I'm completing, and I went through my questions, enjoyment, revenue, aptitude. I immediately picked the lowest scoring items and I started to delegate them. I was being very efficient, but I wasn't being very effective, because some of those low scoring items didn't need to be delegated. They didn't need to be done by anyone. I had been doing them because I'd always done them. But when I really looked seriously at them, I realized no one needs to do this task. And so I think sometimes we jump in and they'll say, okay, let's delegate. If you go through your list of tasks, I guarantee you'll find at least one that doesn't need to be done. So you can immediately save some time if you honestly look at your list and ask, does it need to be done? The next question, before you just go out and hire somebody to start delegating to, or grabbing someone on your existing team, is ask yourself, can it be automated? We're about to be in 2022. With all the tools available now, you can automate so many things. If it's a task that's going to happen more than one time, ask yourself, can we automate this? I know we used to do that, and I was always amazed at how much time we could save. So another pitfall that is kind of relevant to this is look at your accountability chart, look at your org chart, look at the team beneath you. Do you have all the right people in the right seats? I used to think I was really bad at delegating. Turns out I was just really bad at hiring. I was hiring a bunch of incompetent people trying to delegate to them. I was never going to have a successful delegation if I was always trying to give the task to someone who couldn't do it. So you need to make sure that you're giving your task, you're delegating your task to someone who's competent enough to actually do the work. So my delegation failures turned out to be hiring failures. When I went back and really looked seriously at my team and sort of hiring the right people, delegating got a lot easier.
Yeah, and one other thing that when you talk about enjoy list, sometimes personally I struggle to see, okay, which one is in my enjoy list and which one is not. And one thing that you talked about was that if there is, you see that you are keep delaying something. It could be hiring in your case, it could be something else in my case. When we see that we are procrastinating, right? So that is normally an indication, right?
That's a signal.
So how is that associated with your enjoy list versus, how is that associated with the delegation?
Yeah, my wife still gives me a hard time about this, honeydew projects around the house. She's like, I still need the light bulbs changed in the yard. And I procrastinated. And finally, you're exactly right. I realized that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's my brain telling me, Ryan, your time is best used either on another project or recovering or, resting or relaxing, whatever it may be. That's a great place to start with delegation. Find those tasks that you really don't enjoy, things that you've naturally procrastinated. Way back in the day, I was really good at Photoshop, and I've always kind of enjoyed that a little bit. But as I've done more tasks throughout the years, that skill is not quite as sharp. And I realized I had a lot of graphic design work I needed to get done. And it just kept getting pushed and getting pushed. And finally, a few weeks back, I started outsourcing it. And I found a third party I could delegate to. And it has been amazing. Now it's exciting. I get to the office every morning. I open my email and I look at what they've completed during the night. And I've got 6 projects with them right now. And so every morning I come in, I look at what the status of each project is. So that's exciting. So I think you're exactly right. The procrastination point is a good place to start as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to take you to back in the days when you were the MSP owner. So we're going to make an assumption that you are done with the startup phase, that, you've made it for the first 5 years. Now you are 20, people MSP, and so you're done with the startup. Now you are in that growth mode. So if you were that MSP owner, what are some of the tasks that you would be delegating in that scenario?
Let me think back to that time. So one of my first things to give up, and I see a lot of MSP owners and leadership team members still doing this, is ticket review. So I was doing ticket review. We ended up pushing that to our operations manager, and she ended up delegating it to our service coordinator, which was our dispatcher. It worked perfectly well and saved so much time. So I think ticket delegation is a lot of MSP owners feel like, hey, that's my money. I need to make sure every one of those invoices and every one of those tickets are perfect. And while that's true, if you're doing more all-inclusive billing, it's not quite as important. Even if you're doing a lot of hourly or project billing, that's still something that can be delegated. So most of the time when I, as an owner, was doing it, I was holding up our entire billing process because I was waiting 10, 20 days into I was proofing September invoices in the middle of October. Once it got moved to my ops manager, she was doing it every week. Once we moved it to our dispatcher, she was doing it at the end of every day. So at the end of the month, we were ready to bill. And so it improved our cash flow. It improved our cycles. It improved AR because people were getting their invoices sooner and they were more accurate. So yeah, I think invoicing and time approval and ticket review, those are some of the first ones. Procurement as far as quoting and ordering and shipping and receiving. On the technical side, I think things like Microsoft partnership, things like cloud setup. I see a lot of owners that are still going in there and configuring some of the servers initially. Anything technical, I think you've got to be out of the technical side. You should be hiring people. If you're the smartest technical resource, when you have 20 employees, if you're the smartest technical resource, you've done a bad job at hiring. So I think you need to be hiring people better than you, smarter than you. And I think the tech side is one of those things that you definitely need to give up sooner than later. You may kind of keep your skill set sharp and every now and then pick up a ticket just so you can know what's going on. But if you're actively working tickets every day, you got to get out of that. You got to have time to work on the business. I always tell people, listen, look at your task today. If you're doing the same type of task today as you were doing 12 months ago, you're not growing. So you've got to constantly, like right now, I can think of 3 things that I want to start doing that I'm not doing right now. Well, guess what? My wife doesn't want me to come home and say, honey, I'm going to start working an extra 20 hours a week. That means if I want to start doing these 3 new tasks, I've got to give up some other things. And I think that's where delegation can be so powerful.
So if that is the delegation list for a MSP owner, now let's go to the other side, which you should not be delegating, or when you talk about working on the business, what that list looks like for you now. You're that MSP owner, done with the startup, you are that growth mindset, you are that platform building mindset. And so what will be in your, those 3 to 5 items there will be your core focus items or core activities list?
Well, I think the first one is you can't outsource your thinking. You've got to think. You've got to have that thinking time about, you're not accidentally going to hit your big goals. You've got to be very intentional about that. I love the old Henry Ford quote. He said, thinking is one of the hardest things, which is why so few people do it. And so I think that you have to get serious about your thinking time. With that being said, I do think you can come close to outsourcing your thinking. I think if you join a great peer group, I used to get some of my best ideas from hanging out with my peer group members. So I think joining a peer group, I think that's something you don't need to delegate. You as an owner, you need to be spending time with other business leaders because you'll get some great ideas, and then go back and use your thinking time to think about what you've learned. So I think thinking is a big one. I think the next one people try to delegate when they shouldn't is interacting with their people, spending that one-on-one time with their direct reports. I think nothing can substitute having a great relationship with the people that work beneath you. I used to try to keep work separate from my personal life. And I realized, no, I spend as much time with these people as I do with my family. I should love the people I work with. And so building those relationships with your direct reports, I think that's important. You can't outsource that. Some people don't outsource it. They just skip it. And so I think you need to be spending time with your best people. I used to try to spend time on my weakest players thinking, okay, they're performing at 30%. If I spend a lot of time, maybe I can get them up to 50%. And I realized I'm wasting my time. If I can find somebody that's already a good player at 70%, I can spend a little bit of time and get them to 90 or 100. So I think spending time with your best people is a great use of your time. We already mentioned peer groups. We mentioned thinking. Your biggest client. I think that yes, you should have an account manager. You should have some salespeople that are touching every client. But if you've got somebody that's paying you a substantial amount of money every month or every year, you've got to get to know them. You need to make sure you have that relationship with them. So I think spending time with big clients, all your direct reports, peer groups, thinking, I think those are some things that you absolutely do not need to delegate. You need to be doing that yourself.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Because having time to think about our thinking, and a lot of people, they kind of don't take time. And my leadership coach, John C. Maxwell, Ryan, he will always teach us that having a thinking chair at home is very important, where you have your cup of coffee on Saturday or Sunday morning, early, if you're an early riser, and just having that thinking chair at home or thinking chair in the office, where you're just kind of thinking, taking time to think about your thinking, because you can't automate that. That is the only thing that normally, human beings so far cannot outsource, cannot do it to systems. You cannot write a script to have system think about something. And the other piece is the relationships with the A players. What I loved about that comment there that you had is that spending more time with your best people, because that's where the opportunity is, where they can save a lot of time for you in having a relationship, right? Relationship is key to have your next layer very healthy and strong. And that leads to a lot of retention of A players, really helping them find their passion and their alignment, the meaningful work. There's so much going on in terms of talent issues, from hiring and retaining and keeping people positive in this world that we're living in right now with the virus. And so having a relationship and really knowing what is going on in that person's world, personal and professional, really will make a difference. And then having time with big clients, as our leadership coach Dan Sullivan will say, that spending time with the check writers, your biggest check writers, right. If they are happy or
should get the most time,
right? So having relationships there with the big clients is very important as well. Now I want to go to a different now persona in a MSP. So we did talk about delegation in the MSP owner's world, or leader who is running the company. Now there's so many other roles, Ryan. For example, a service manager role. So if we want to apply this thinking in terms of delegation list and in terms of what service managers should keep and stay focused on. So for example, owner is focusing on that thinking time and the relationship time and big clients time. And so is there any variance when you look at service managers delegation list versus must-do focus on list?
I think there's some subtle differences. There are some definite similarities. What I see with most service managers, and this is still mind-boggling to me, but I'll see a company that has 20 people, 25 people on their service team, and they'll tell me, oh yeah, we know our service manager is still billable 50% of the time. I'm like, how are you managing that size team if you're billable 4 hours a day? Like, that just blows my mind. You need to spend that time developing your team, no matter how good of a tech you are. If you could develop some of those people on your team a little bit more, help them with their growth plans, spend time leading and managing them well, you'll be much better off in the long run. So I think they also need to spend time on the definite do list. I think you need to spend time with your A players, have those direct reports that are most beneficial. I think also reporting. I think most service managers don't really look at the numbers enough. So I think coming up with a good list, I know we used to have a good list of about 8 items. our service manager looked at. Most of them were daily, a few were weekly, and a few were monthly. But it was kind of a quick health check on the whole department every single day. How are we doing? How are we doing? We had a gauge right there in front of their face on the wall that they were looking at all the time. And then they also need some thinking time, maybe not quite as much as your visionary owners, but when they get the goals, like right now is a great time of the year to be doing planning for next year. So we're going into the Q4 for 2021. You should already be thinking about your plan for 22, or even solidifying your plan for 2022. When the ops manager gets those goals, like, okay, we want to push down our response time. We want to, increase our account management time, whatever those goals are. Think about how we make that happen. Again, you're not accidentally going to achieve those goals. So let's be intentional about that thinking time. What do they need to do? They probably don't need to be looking at tickets every day. Maybe the service coordinator, the dispatcher, looking at tickets and then just kicking back anything that looks unusual. But I think they need to be out of some of that day-to-day dispatching, ticket review, and spending time at a little bit higher level.
Yeah, and it's a big struggle, especially when a highly technical person is promoted to that type of service management role. Mm-hmm. And they naturally gravitates towards doing more escalation tickets and other things still as part of their role, which is okay if that is a budget. Mm-hmm. It's by design that you are trying to fill two boxes. It's okay, but eventually, if you are a full-time moving towards a full-time service manager role, you got to delegate the technical side and focus more on the business side of the role, right? Which is very different than being a good tech. It's more people. Again, in the service manager mm-hmm. role, it's your people, it's your processes, and you are really you should not be directly billable to the customer. But one question there that comes to my mind, Ryan, is that if you are not, in some shape or form, that cost is going to get into your pricing and packaging. So where do you see MSPs booking their service manager if they're not directly billing that agreement that they serve, but somehow, somewhere, their time is being spent on managing these agreements and delivering service to these customers? Where do they book, and what is normally that percentage of the revenue? So in terms of your service LMA layer cost, do you have any understanding there? Mm-hmm.
So everyone who is directly necessary for our service delivery, like our service coordinator / dispatcher, our service manager, our team leads. And I think you're exactly right. I think when your service team is 3 or 4 people, that service manager absolutely has to be billable. When it's 30 or 40 people, there's no way they can be billable. But no, I think you're right. I think that we used to book all of our service coordinator, ops manager time to cost of goods sold. So if you're thinking about your P&L, it was a cost of goods sold for our technical, for our offerings. And typically, I would suggest, creating ticket. If they're spending a significant amount of time looking at something, create a ticket on it. Obviously, you can make it not billable, or if it's billed to an agreement, because you need to know. I think that's something that we don't do enough. My favorite report used to be agreement profitability. I ran that agreement profitability and made big decisions on who to fire as clients and who to keep as clients based on that. So if my techs are only putting 3 hours of time in, but my service manager is putting 5 hours of time in towards that agreement, trying to negotiate. Yeah. When a client used to call and, you spend an hour complaining about bills and you've got to work through that. Well, that's somebody's time. So I think that should be billed against that agreement, because we need to know at the end of the day, what is our real profitability towards each of those agreements? So yeah, I definitely think they should book their time. I think that time should go against the agreement, and it should overall, we used to shoot for about a 55 to 60% gross margin on our MSP clients. Project work was about 60 to 62. And if we still had a few straggler break fix, those were normally around 40%. And so if we're building that against the agreement, it's going against it. So I want to see if we're hitting our 55% goal.
Yeah, so 55% is a common benchmark that I see with all these benchmarking tools, especially in the channel. And is it still the same that from 55%, 10% normally is on tools and other pieces, and so 10% of the revenue, and then so total, if you have 55% service GP, you're left with 45%. and the 45% out of 45%, 10% for the tool set, and then 35% or up to 35% is that service labor COGS. Are those numbers still staying the same? That's how MSPs are looking at it, MSPs that you work with?
The ones that I work with that's still their target. I will say that some that have moved to more cloud offerings, they're charging a higher per seat cost, and therefore their gross margins are higher, which means their employee labor is obviously lower. So if you are in a place where I've got a few clients that have moved to cloud only, they're only offering managed service to companies who want to go all in on the cloud. And I'll tell you, there are many more opportunities of that type than you think now, just because of COVID. It's pushed more and more people to this remote working world. And so cloud looks very attractive. So I've seen much higher all-in-seat prices with bigger margins for people who are doing that. I have a few clients that are still, offering some break fix, so it pulls those numbers down. But yeah, I think the beauty of that, if you can aim for a 30 to 35% labor, technical labor cost, you can get to that old multiple 3 times. That's the ultimate goal, right? You want to bring in 3 times that employee's W-2. If you got an employee making $100,000, then you be bringing in $300,000. And so I think that's still the target, and I think that good MSPs are still aiming for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Now, so I want to come back to our leadership, kind of how we develop as leaders by improving our delegation skills. We talked about the owner of the company. We talked about more like visionary role. And I know you're not using EOS. I'm still talking about the EOS structure because you have a lot of experience there. Even though you moved on from that EOS facilitation and a consultant there. So talking about, there are a lot of MSPs using still EOS. And so there's a visionary role, there's the integrator role, then there are the service managers. So we did talk about delegation in the service manager's world, the MSP owner or visionaries world. Now let's talk about a little bit in terms of integrator role. And in any setup, scaling up EOS, so you have that seat, which is in between your department heads and the visionary, you call it COO or you call it integrator. So can you talk to me a little bit about that delegation list, like must have when you are like integrator is working on that box, that role that they have versus integrators that are not focusing on the right activities that should be part of that COO role or integrator role. So can you talk to me in the context of delegation there?
Sure. So I was the integrator at my MSP, and spent 7 years in the EOS world, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And you're right. So I think that the MSPs I work with today, a lot of their, and I was the same way, a lot of their integrators used to be ops managers, used to be technical. They still have that technical skill set. And so I think just like ops managers, I see them occasionally jumping into project work or, getting involved in closing tickets every now and then. And while, again, that's not a horrible idea, it's a good idea, to keep your skills sharp. I think you have to be careful. If you are the escalation point, I think you can very quickly gravitate towards that just because it's the most familiar to you. So I think definitely get out of as much technical work as you can.
Can we pause for a second?
Yes.
Our editor, please take this part out. We can restart from here. I was holding on to it. Like I have to stop.
All right, so let's see. I'll back up. Okay, so as an integrator, and I was the integrator in my MSP. So also, 7 years in the EOS world, so I'm very familiar with what you're talking about there. I would say that many integrators that I work with now, many MSPs, their integrators still doing technical work. Just like me, they'd come up through the ranks as a technical person. Maybe they were even ops manager for a while, and because of that, they have that tech skill set. In fact, they probably really enjoy it. And so they're that escalation point, or they're still doing some tech work. And that's okay every now and then, but if you're spending any significant amount of your time every week working on escalations, you probably need to delegate that. Procurement also, I think you got to get anything around parts ordering, procurement, AR, anything like that. You should be managing any outsourced vendor. If you got to outsource legal counsel or even outsource CPAs, delegate to those guys. Let them do what they're great at. So I think just like the visionary, we always say the visionary has the great ideas and the integrator is responsible for kind of building the plan to make it happen. So I think just like the visionary needs thinking time to think about the big stuff, I think the integrator needs an equal amount of thinking time to think about how. Again, who, not how. Let the integrator figure out the how. And so how are we going to get from A to B? Visionaries are great about thinking, okay, we're at A, we want to go to Z, and they'll jump over every other letter in the alphabet to get to Z. I think the integrator's like, okay, how do we get to B? How do we get to C? How do we get to D? So I think the integrator's got to be really good at that process thinking, that step by step. You got to love a spreadsheet. I always say a good integrator likes a spreadsheet probably more than they like hanging out with their friends. That was definitely my case. So you got to love the numbers. You got to love checking out reports. I think that most integrators don't spend enough time, in the reporting, in the day-to-day. I'll go to meet with a client every 90 days and I'll say, hey, how's our numbers? Oh, let me look. I'm like, hold on. If the integrator can't rattle off what the numbers are, they're not doing their job well. Like they should know constantly what's our margins, what's our, how much MRR do we have? How many seats are we managing? If you can't look at me and tell me how many seats you're managing or how much MRR you have, something's not right. And so I think that the integrator needs to make sure they're really good and automate. I think I used to spend a decent amount of time working with third parties or working with our tech guys to automate some things, with business intelligence to make all of our lives easier. And process, I think ultimately, I think the integrators usually own the process component. So make sure that we have processes and they're being followed. So I think that's another thing that the integrator absolutely needs to own and spend more time doing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Ryan. This is a very, very powerful, very impactful topic. Now, to recap, Ryan, so if I'm a MSP owner and I want to learn more, I want to do more in the area of delegation, can you tell us, what should be my 3 to 5 items that I should kind of really start with? So what should be my next step?
So, I was thinking through this as I was writing the book, and I tried to make, I'm a big fan of process, and I tried to make the whole thing a one-page process. And the first step of the process was really deciding, do you want to delegate? And I think this comes back to your why. I can tell you why I want to delegate, but it's probably not going to resonate with you. Figure out why you want to delegate. Do you want to spend more time with your family? Do you want to be able to take a vacation without being pulled, back to the office? Or do you just want to be able to have more thinking time and let the business run without you? So whatever your why is, think about what your why is. That'll be the best motivator for you. What is your why? Once we have our why, then it's like, what do we delegate? I think this is where you start your task list, use that ERA delegation tool, and figure out the task that you want to start. But before we start delegating, let's ask ourselves, does this have to be done at all? This is where you can just say no. That's the best time management tip ever. Just say no. So if something absolutely doesn't have to be done, stop it right there. If it does need to be done, can it be automated? I think that's the second question. And then if it can't be automated, let's find a great person. It could be somebody on your team. You can outsource it. This is a great time to bring up the topic of get an assistant. I see so many clients. I was with a company just last week. These guys are doing millions and millions of dollars of business a year, and they don't have an assistant in the whole building. And I'm like, you could save so much time if you have a good assistant or two. I am a one-person company, or I was a one-person company. Now I'm 3. The other 2 are both assistants. So that's how strong. You shouldn't just have one. In many cases, maybe you need 2. But once we figure out who to delegate to, or what to delegate now, who to delegate.
With the assistant, Ryan, that Jack Daly always talk about, that if you don't have an assistant, you are the assistant. That's so powerful.
That's a great point. I love that. Yes, that is very true. So then once we have our who we're going to delegate to, then it's the how. And so I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. And again, if we've hired the right who, the how gets a lot easier. But I think when it comes to how, the first question is, what's the end result we want? Again, don't think you have to give them the step-by-step. If you've hired the right person, you don't have to give them a 10-page printed process. But you need to be clear on the outcome. There's so many times I see people delegating, they're not even sure what they want. if you don't know what you want, how are they going? They can't read your mind. You're hiring people that are not mind readers. So you need to figure out what the end result is, remembering who, not how. And then after you figure out this is what I want, figure out when is it due? Is this due tomorrow or a month or a week or at the end of the year? So figure out your timeline. Then once you've got that, now delegate the task. So you give have a meeting, give the task to this delegatee, the person you're going to delegate to. Once you do that, you got to give them a level of authority. I think so many times we delegate to people, we don't really tell them what level of authority they have. So if this is someone that's new to you, you haven't worked with them before, and you're still learning each other, you're probably giving them a low level of authority. You may be saying, hey, go research this, bring the results back to me, and I'll make the decision. But once you've built that trust, you can tell them, hey, go research that and tell me what you would do and come back. And eventually, as you build trust, you can say, just go do it. I trust your judgment. Report to me after it's done. And so I think you've got to lay out the level, like what level of authority do they have before they move on. And then set a check-in schedule. I think so many times we don't delegate, we abdicate, which is kind of the old dump and run. We're so glad to get help. We just dump everything on them and we run away as fast as we can. And I think that's where we mess up. So I think you need a check-in rhythm, like, okay, we're going to meet every Friday morning and talk about this, or we're going to meet once a month, whatever the rhythm is. Establish the check-in rhythm. And that's a great time to bring up, well, what happens if they have a question? They save it to the next meeting? Do they come to you immediately? Talk about how do they get problems or how do they get their questions answered? And then lastly, after it's due, do a kind of a post-mortem, a debrief to figure out what worked well, what didn't work. Because again, you want to get better at this. Delegation's kind of like budgeting, kind of like going to the gym. The more you do it, the better you get at it. You're building that muscle. So the good news is I found that I was delegating most of my task to just a few people. And so as I did the postmortems, we figured out, okay, I need to check in a little bit more often with you, or I don't need to check in quite as often with you. So you get to understand the needs and the skill set of each of your people, and you get better at it. And so I think that's your how.
Oh man, that's very, very valuable, Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of experience there, and this is something that we all need as leaders. And thank you so much for sharing very valuable insights there and your experience. And what I heard you saying in this entire episode is start with your why you want to delegate, right? Which you also mentioned that is something that can help you understand your why of delegation is understand why you started this business in the first place. Why of your entrepreneurship, right? Are you looking for more time? Are you looking for more money? Are you looking to grow your business beyond you, right? Where not all roads lead to you. So understand your why, whatever that means to you as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. Then understand what do you need to delegate? What do you want to delegate? Your needs and wants in terms of delegating. Understanding your needs and wants in terms of delegation. And then understanding how, best practices that you shared. And that's where you are kind of really defining the outcome that you are delegating so that people know that what you are looking for, what you're delegating, what good looks like in terms of results, defining results in that area, and then control, let it go. Let it go, because giving that authority to the person that you're delegating to is so crucial. And that's where I personally made a lot of mistakes, because normally entrepreneurs want that control of the outcome. But they don't take time to define the outcome and let that person know, hey, this is what good looks like. And having then they feel that need of having that control or some control. So let it go and give that authority to the person, and then having that check-in that if result is defined, authority is given, you got to manage the business risk. And the way you can do it is by having those rhythms, check-in touch points. It could be monthly, it could be weekly, to make sure that if that person is moving in the right direction to produce a result, and even if that person is doing 80% as good as you were doing, then take that, because progress, not perfection. And a lot of times that I fail, this person is not doing it like I do. This person is not doing that quality work. And what I learned over time is that 80%, if 80% is acceptable, that person may not be doing the way I'm doing. As long as the person can produce the result that we agreed upon, then we're good. So thank you so much for sharing why of delegation, what to delegate, and how to delegate and be successful, expanding your business beyond you, and being that successful entrepreneur who can take their business from a startup to self-sustaining MSP. And we appreciate that. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks, Sonny. Thanks for having me today, and look forward to talking to everyone again soon.
If you enjoyed this episode of Sunny's Silver Linings, please like, follow, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next week.